Lies, betrayal, death. 2023's Modern Warfare 3 had it all. And I'm not talking about the campaign. Modern Warfare 3 was never intended to be a standalone game, at least not in the traditional sense. What began as a planned expansion for Modern Warfare 2 was ultimately repackaged, rebranded, and sold as a full-price sequel. And instead of just ignoring any criticism, Activision gaslit the fans by saying this was the plan all along. That MW3 had always been a standalone premium entry in the series that was years in the making. That narrative, however, doesn't align with what industry insiders, code-level data, and the final product itself all suggest. I'm Captain Peach, welcome back to the pit, and let's explore the timeline of Modern Warfare 3's development, the numerous signs that it was originally intended as a DLC, and the broader implications that this has for player trust and the AAA industry. To understand how we got to Modern Warfare 3, we need to go back a few years.
Watcher to 6 Actual. Target is in the main house. You have execute authority.
Bravo 6. Going dark.
After the release of the incredibly explosive Modern Warfare 2019 reboot that ended up being one of the highest selling Call of Duties in history, reinvigorating the franchise and bringing the immensely popular Warzone mode to even more players, Activision knew they had struck gold. Through a new game engine, playing on nostalgia for the Modern Warfare sub-series, and delivering a fun and fresh experience, MW1 ended up selling 41 million copies. It was the shot in the arm the franchise needed after several years of declining sales. However, the follow-up game that released after, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, while still selling well, sold considerably less at 30 million copies. Call of Duty wasn't fully revitalized.
Welcome to a brand new beginning, you sorry shit.
The shot in the arm was largely just for Modern Warfare, and the series overall kept suffering. In 2021, the year after, Call of Duty Vanguard released, a game that severely underperformed commercially and was met with widespread criticism from both fans and critics alike. It had the weakest launch in franchise history since Call of Duty 4, and the sales dropped 40% from Black Ops Cold War. It was clear that aside from Modern Warfare, the franchise was facing fatigue, both creatively and financially. And for the first time, Activision appeared to acknowledge that reality. They knew Modern Warfare was what the series needed, and that the other sub-franchises of the series like Black Ops would need to revitalize their respective series in their own right. This would then lead into what would be a massive franchise-shaking decision for Call of Duty. In early 2022, Bloomberg journalist Jason Schreier talked with several key developers and insiders that reported that Activision would skip its traditional annual Call of Duty release in 2023. Instead of launching a new mainline title, the company would support the upcoming Modern Warfare 2 for a second year, something pretty much unheard of in Call of Duty. This decision aligned with a strategic delay for Treyarch's next entry, shifted from a 2023 release and now planned for 2024 that we now know was Black Ops 6. That game needed more development time for them to innovate and reinvigorate the Black Ops brand after Cold War underperformed.
I'm not gonna lie, you smell very, very good right now.
But by delaying this, Activision now had a gap in its Call of Duty yearly release schedule that they hadn't had in nearly 20 years. So what's the next best plan? Build a huge paid expansion for what they knew would be a massive hit. That being the direct sequel to the Modern Warfare 2019 reboot, Modern Warfare 2. They were also going to be launching the sequel to the incredibly popular and free-to-play Battle Royale Warzone. After the renewal of the Modern Warfare series and the intense nostalgia for the original 2009 MW2, Activision knew that if there was any game that could pull off an expansion, it would be the MW2 reboot. Internally, the content was expected to be pretty large scale, featuring a continuation of the MW2 storyline with a campaign supposedly set in Mexico, what was called a greatest hits map pack of fan-favorite MW2 multiplayer maps, new modes, and perhaps a new PvE element. This was partially corroborated during a Q2 2022 earnings report where Activision stated that its revenue declined year over year, reflecting lower engagement for the Call of Duty franchise. They assured investors, however, that their teams are well positioned to support the release of 2022's two main Call of Duty experiences, and that Call of Duty would receive premium paid content in 2023. Weird choice of words if they were just going to release another Call of Duty like they do every year.
You know, I've just about had it with your little mind games.
This idea made sense though, as Modern Warfare 2 ended up becoming the fastest selling COD entry in franchise history. Rather than risk cannibalizing its success, the idea was to extend it, much like Destiny or other ongoing live service games do. This would have marked a significant pivot in how Activision handled Call of Duty, shifting away from rigid annual releases in favor of more flexible, player-focused updates. At least, that was the plan. Somewhere along the way, that plan unraveled, and what was once an expansion became something else entirely. By mid-2022, just a year and a half before the release of this expansion, Activision had changed course. Rather than follow through on this new expansion model, the company decided to elevate the MW2 content into a full-fledged release, Modern Warfare 3. This decision was not creative. Very far from it. It was strategic. week. Activision, like many major publishers, is driven by quarterly projections. A gap year meant a huge gap in revenue. A $30 expansion could not match the profit of a $70 boxed release, nor would it generate the same level of marketing hype, pre-order numbers, or collector's edition sales. And I'm sure this decision was also cemented after the player counts for MW2 dropped drastically, losing over half of its players within a single month of launch. The game was just simply not as engaging as Activision had hoped. As a result, what was initially scoped as DLC, designed to extend MW2's life, was reframed as a new installment. Sledgehammer Games, after their disappointing launch of Call of Duty Vanguard, supposedly began work on a sequel to one of their earlier games, Advanced Warfare. What you're seeing is Advanced Warfare. However, upon the delay of Black Ops 6, Sledgehammer was put in charge of the Modern Warfare 2 DLC, before then being redirected to turn this expansion into a fully marketable sequel. The change of scope happened very late into development, and because of that, the time and resources available were far below what a standard Call of Duty release usually receives. And the end result reflected that. Aside from the initial reports, how do we know that MW3 was originally meant as a DLC? Well, let's take a look at all of the supporting evidence, and there's a lot of it. First is the map design. Every single 6v6 multiplayer map included at launch in Modern Warfare 3 is a remaster of content from Modern Warfare 2 in 2009. All of them. There were no original maps created for the standard multiplayer in this release. That alone would be odd for a full sequel, but if this were originally an anniversary-themed expansion for MW2, it makes perfect sense. And it makes even more sense that 2022's MW2, a reboot of one of the most beloved Call of Duty games ever, wouldn't receive a single remastered map from the 2009 version throughout its entire life cycle. Why would they save all of the remastered MW2 maps for MW3? That would have been an easy way to hype up the MW2 release even more with some fan-favorite maps. Second is the progression carryover. In an unprecedented move, Activision allowed players to carry forward their weapons, camos, and attachments from Modern Warfare 2. The first time in franchise history. On the surface, this might seem player-friendly, and it is, but it's also highly unusual. Every prior COD sequel is forced to reset. Why not this one? Because the back-end systems are the same. The progression framework wasn't rebuilt, it was extended. Every other Call of Duty game was built as a separate entity by different developers on a different modified version of the game engine and wouldn't be compatible with previous entries. This, however, was not the case with MW3, which leads into my next point. Both MW2 and MW3 are both accessed through Call of Duty HQ, a unified launcher that consolidated content across both titles. They also run on the exact same engine. There are no major visual upgrades, no performance overhauls, and aside from a couple of gameplay changes, it played largely the same. This kind of integration is only necessary if the content is being delivered as part of a shared platform, which is typical of live service models, but not standalone sequels that are developed entirely separately. The plan was for this HQ to be the central hub for new Call of Duty games, and using MW3 for the first iteration would be the easiest choice, as it runs nearly identical to MW2, with very few changes. And being built on the same engine and in a single platform makes it way easier to carry over progression from the previous game.
The $30K I spent on this seems like a steal right now.
I also want to point out that the next Call of Duty, Black Ops 6, didn't maintain any progression carryover, and I guarantee the next one won't either, because they weren't built on the exact same engine using much of the same code, which is probably the most glaring evidence. And that is what data miners uncovered. The beta codes for MW3 use the exact same concept ID as that of MW2, which means that these are essentially the game codes from the previous year's game, just reissued. Also, investigation into the game's code itself revealed that it's built on much of the same exact systems as MW2, which directly contradicts the public messaging that MW3 was developed independently and is a full-fledged sequel. But the lack of any real kind of upgrade or difference in MW3 is also very apparent in the game's campaign. MW3's campaign was absolutely panned on release. It featured reused Warzone maps repurposed into open combat missions, minimal cutscenes, and a weak narrative arc. Many of the missions lacked traditional scripting, set pieces, or pacing, and on top of that, it was much shorter than every other COD campaign, clocking in at roughly 5 hours to beat. And that's if you take your time. Many people were completing it in just 3 hours.
No 8-minute speech like last year, but fun fact, my speech was actually longer than this year's Call of Duty campaign. What?
It felt unfinished because it was unfinished. Or rather, it was never meant to stand on its own, and it was quickly thrown together to create a sequel-level continuation of the story.
Another company I'll never work for.
And finally, there's the fact that Activision had never ever released a Call of Duty sequel within a year of a previous entry. They always allowed their different studios to alternate releases, keeping Call of Duty launches fresh and different every time without getting too stale too quickly, while giving developers ample time to work on their games. Releasing a sequel so similar to the last one and so quickly would contribute to franchise fatigue, and result in a faster player drop-off. But Activision would have loved for everybody to ignore all of that evidence in the reports and to think entirely differently.
Where do we draw the line, sir?
You draw the line wherever you need it, Sergeant.
Despite mounting evidence, Activision maintained its position. The company insisted that Modern Warfare 3 was always planned as a full standalone title. In public interviews and press releases, representatives described MW3 as a premium release. Sledgehammer Games echoed that sentiment, framing their involvement as a labor of love and that they had been crafting it for years. But this narrative contradicts not only the original Bloomberg reporting and the evidence I've shared, but also several more insider leaks. Other internal sources indicated that the project was given only 18 months of development, about half of what a standard Call of Duty release has. It was rushed for some reason, which makes sense if it wasn't years in the making, but was thrown together last minute.
We get dirty, and the world stays clean.
The Zombies mode was also reportedly handled entirely by Treyarch on short notice, while they were still working on Black Ops 6. And that fact is very apparent with the mode as well. Its structure was largely just a mixed reskin of previous entries' Outbreak and DMZ modes. There was minimal innovation, a weak zombie storyline that tried to connect itself to the other zombie modes, and a big departure from what the traditional mode was known for. As a side note, and I feel like I'm in the minority here, but I don't care, I would love to see them do another Extinction. There, I said it. Throwing down turrets and traps when defending the drill, that rush at the end with a nuke is armed, underrated as heck. And I'm getting so tired of zombies every single year.
What? You gonna kick me out?
But anyway, I digress. So, a bare-bones campaign, multiplayer that reused the same engine as the previous entry and allowed for content to be carried over. All of the 6v6 multiplayer maps were simply remastered 2009 maps, and a lackluster zombies that was stitched together in a short amount of time by an entirely different studio. What was the labor of love years in the making? By calling it a sequel, Activision could justify a full $70 price point, deploy a global marketing campaign, and ensure that pre-orders, deluxe editions, and in-game microtransactions flowed through the same pipeline as past annual releases. They wouldn't miss their yearly or quarterly revenue targets, and it's Call of Duty, so it'll still make a boatload of money, and much more than an expansion could ever make. From a business standpoint, it makes perfect sense. But from a consumer standpoint, it's misleading at best, and at worst, it's completely dishonest. And that sentiment was reflected when the game finally released. The backlash was swift. At launch, Modern Warfare 3 became the lowest rated Call of Duty title in the franchise's history. Critics called the campaign shallow and rushed, multiplayer was labeled repetitive, uninspired, and derivative, and the Zombies mode got much of the same criticism, including fans' disappointment at the drastic departure from the standard formula. Across social media, longtime fans pointed out what had been obvious for months. The game wasn't a sequel. It was an expansion stretched out just enough to sell at a full price. And sales data reflected some of this backlash. While MW2 broke franchise records, MW3 sales dropped 25%. Engagement numbers also suffered, with major player drop-offs occurring within weeks of launch. As reviewers and players peeled back the layers, it became harder to argue that this was anything more than a repurposed content drop, rushed out to fill an empty release slot. Many had seen this coming, but had hoped that Activision wouldn't follow through, and MW3 really offered a full breadth of fresh content. But unfortunately, that didn't happen, at least at launch. However, Sledgehammer did spend the rest of the standard COD lifecycle updating the game and bringing new content, which for many helped the game become incredibly fun. But for others, it just wasn't enough.
I am now going to assault your mind with subliminal messages.
Playtime is over when Nikki drops in.
Sorry you had to see that.
The story of Modern Warfare 3 isn't just about a single game. It's a case study in how marketing can be used to shift perception, how a corporation can reframe scope, intent, and delivery after the fact in order to meet revenue goals. Was MW3 the worst Call of Duty ever made? Probably not, but it's pretty subjective and up to the players to decide. But it was certainly one of the most uninspired.
Let's jump him after he's done.
This wasn't a title designed to push the franchise forward, it was designed to preserve the illusion of forward momentum and building upon the series. And I was never expecting Activision to admit that they switched directions and sold an expansion as a full release, but when the reports came out, Activision and Sledgehammer doubled down that MW3 was a full-priced premium release that was a labor of love years in the making, and that this was their plan all along, even when all of the evidence said otherwise. In doing so, they set a dangerous precedent. If a major publisher can take unfinished or recycled content, repackage it as a standalone title, and convince millions to pay full price for it, what incentive is there to build something new when the marketing machine can sell something that already exists? The Modern Warfare 3 situation illustrates how publishers will go as far as they can to achieve their target quarterly earnings. And if players don't push back, if they normalize these tactics, there's very little reason to stop. Activision gaslit the fanbase and millions of players. They told us that this was the plan all along, that this was a full release, that this is what MW3 had always been. But it wasn't. And the worst part? It worked. At least temporarily. The game still outsold every other game when it released. But long term, trust is harder to win back than a pre-order. But then again, Black Ops 6 became the biggest release in franchise history the next year, so maybe not. But hey, That's marketing. If you like the video, slap the subscribe, and if you want to watch how one trailer nearly killed Call of Duty or another video YouTube thinks you'd absolutely love, click on one of the videos on screen. And until next time, stay peachy.